first time I thought of anything like Bookshop was probably 2011. I had started a company called Electric Literature a couple of years before, and that was back in 2009. There was a lot of concern about what the internet was going to do to the book industry because everybody's attention was being drawn away from books and being drawn to phones. People were playing video games, going on YouTube. There were all these new mediums, and they were all sucking people's attention away from reading. I felt even then, even in 2009, that the key was not to resist these changes, because if we resisted them, then they would all move on without us. And in a way, all of people's fears would become self-fulfilling prophecies. The wonderful thing about digital is it can reach anybody, and it's very little cost to entry. And it was good for me because I had no advantages. I had no money. I had no connections in New York City. I just had an idea for, at the time, Electric Literature. So I embraced digital completely. We were the first literary organization with its own app. We had a YouTube channel. We were using social media, all this stuff that isn't revolutionary today. But at that time, we were the only ones doing it. And we were like 3 people in a 400 square foot room. I think it was around 2011, 2012, I tried to interest people in creating an indie alternative to Amazon, something that would support independent culture, independent presses, and be a nonprofit version of Amazon, basically. And I went to a bunch of different granting organizations to see if somebody like the MacArthur Foundation or the Ford Foundation would fund it. And nobody was interested. They all thought it was kind of a non-starter. I did a tour, I visited a lot of offices, I gave my pitch, didn't work, so I moved on. Then in 2015, I started a website called Literary Hub, which became the most popular books-related website in the world that isn't owned by Amazon. I started a publishing house in 2015, Catapult. So I was publishing books, I was really engaged in the internet, and Amazon kept growing. And in the end, it might be good for Amazon because their long game is not the same as our long game. Our long game is sustainability, creating art, creating culture that we're proud of, publishing diverse voices, keeping a conversation, a cultural conversation alive that kind of progresses. At the end of 2018 is when I really decided that something had to be done. There had to be some kind of alternative. So I went back to my old idea and I tried again to raise money for it. This time I went to private investors and I said it would be a B corporation. A B corporation is a lot like a normal corporation, except for it's for the public good. So we're saying that there's a mission here, and the mission here is a sustainable publishing industry and supporting independent local bookstores. It's not just like local bookstores are great places, which they are, but it's also local bookstores are really important anchors to communities. They're places where authors do readings and connect with their fans. They're places where book clubs congregate. They're places where schools can do book drives. The key that Amazon has is that they control about 90% of online book sales. And e-commerce as a percentage of consumer activity is going up about 10% year over year. That means that any retailer that wants to survive in the next 10 years has to have an e-commerce strategy. I knew that we had to create something that was simple, something that was fast, something that anyone could use to take away all the barriers that were keeping these stores from having good online presences. And it also needed to have an affiliate program that would benefit local independent bookstores. So that we could pay media organizations to link to us instead of linking to Amazon. So I went out and kind of pitched the idea, and in 2019, people understood the need for it much more than they did in 2012. We launched January, and we're on track to do about $50 million in sales this year, and we've already raised about $7.2 million directly into the pockets of independent bookstores. So it turned out to be a really timely launch because of COVID, because all of the reasons that stores needed to go online before, they were 5 times as important once COVID happened. When we launched in January, we were only 5 people. We were, working in an office in the city, and we were planning on being in beta for like 6 months and improving the platform gradually because we wanted to make the platform great before we tried to scale. And instead, in 5 weeks, COVID really started becoming a factor. Stores started onboarding like crazy. We went from 250 stores to 870 stores on our platform. We'd sold $50,000 worth of books in February. In March, we started selling $50,000 worth of books a day. And by April, we were selling $150,000 worth of books a day. And we hadn't built enough of the program out to really support that work. I had to deal with all of these problems, like suddenly shipping notifications aren't going out, or we're sending too many orders to the warehouse and the distributor, and our API is failing and orders are disappearing, and I have to track them down and resubmit them. So it became a crazy white-knuckled ride of trying to support the huge amount of business that was coming in. In June, we sold $10 million worth of books. And that was more than I expected to sell. Like in 2023, we had to adapt very quickly to a massive scale, and we had to hire people like crazy. And it was like a lot of growing pains and a lot of insanity. But the thing that really made it meaningful and kept us going and was there were stores emailing us every day saying, "Thank God you came along. Thank God you're here. You're a lifeline for us. We don't know how we would be surviving this without you." And that is just incredibly meaningful, and it makes you want to get up at 5 a.m. and tackle the problems. There were things from every bit of my past that I drew upon to do Bookshop. Back in 20 years ago, I was working for Disney doing SAP implementations and B2B e-commerce stuff and accounting. At the time, I had really no interest in doing that. I was just good at it. And so I was able to have a career in it, but I really wanted to be doing something creative. So I quit that job eventually and became an editor of a magazine. And then I launched Electric Lit. So I launched a bunch of consumer-facing websites, but they weren't really e-commerce. And then I launched a publishing company. I made a lot of contacts in the book world. And then Bookshop sort of used everything that I had to know. Every contact I made from publishing books was important when I launched Bookshop. My old e-commerce experience and software development experience suddenly became really important. My experience scaling websites and setting up websites and understanding of the infrastructure, that became really important. The cultural knowledge of like what authors are important and how to speak to authors and agents, that becomes really important too for social media, for marketing. Like you're talking to book lovers. And every book that I publish as a publisher, it has a PR campaign. And so I know PR quite well. And I've been on the other side of PR campaigns where people pitch articles to Literary Hub. And I know how it feels to be on the editor being pitched a story. And I know how much being able to tell your story as a company matters to your success. It matters when you're trying to find investors. And it matters when people write about your company. So I really think that like for 20 years, I was kind of preparing for it. And it's the only thing I've ever done that uses all of it. One thing I've been really surprised by is when I started it, I thought, well, it's not really a creative business. I still love working with authors on books. And so I'm going to do this because it's necessary. But my heart is still with publishing and writing. But what I found is that it's actually extremely creative. Scaling a company and making it work has been a really creative activity. And so I found it very fulfilling in that way too. And you do get to work with editorial content and storytelling and working with authors. And authors can be affiliates for Bookshop. So a lot of authors are engaging with Bookshop. They're kind of on our side and rooting for us. And that's been really great to see. So it has a lot of creative aspects, and a lot of it is touching on all kinds of interests I've had. Although it certainly is the most businessy business I've done so far. I think everybody feels that now. We're all on Zoom all the time. We're all isolated and really can feel how much you miss the proximity to people. I don't think anything replaces physical space and, just being around people. Essentially, I hope the Bookshop can be like a digital augmentation to that physical space. Now, what digital can do is reach people all over the world for very little additional expense. It can also create a community that might not be quite as strong in ties as physical communities are sometimes, but it can be much broader. And so stores that have good digital presences, they can have communities of tens of thousands of people, even if they're in a small town. That's what we're trying to do with Bookshop, is amplify everybody's community and give them a bigger digital community that wants to support them. And we're going to be doing more. Like we're going to be doing education sessions for stores to get them to be better at selling books online and better at using social media, better at using email lists, better at using all the tools available, Zoom, Crowdcast, all that stuff to engage their audience. We have stores in Alaska that are like, we're getting customers from Oklahoma and Florida now. That's something you can do only digital. We have a map which you can visit when you go to bookshop.org, and you can find any bookstore, and you can shop from that bookstore and support that bookstore with your purchases. So we got about 2,000 customers a day going to that map, and they're just picking out bookstores. Sometimes they choose the one closest to them, but sometimes they'll just see what's going on in Montana and choose a bookstore there. So it's super cool, and you can only do that digitally. So the way that you can reach people and connect with people digitally is really extraordinary and special. I think it's important to bridge the gap between digital spaces and physical spaces, and that's one of the things that Bookshop is trying to do. And things can go viral. We have bookseller recommendation lists where a bookseller can choose a series of books or a group of books and put it all together in a list and write an introduction and curate, basically, and use their expertise. And we have a bunch of Black-owned bookstores on the platform. And some of the Black-owned bookstores around Juneteenth and the Black Lives Matter protests created anti-racist reading lists. Those anti-racist reading lists are shareable, and they went viral. They went shared on Facebook and Twitter hundreds of times, and thousands of times for some of them. And in some cases, they brought in like $500,000 in revenue for those stores that created that anti-racist reading list. So the store becomes a content creator, and that content can be shared widely, and it can expose them to customers that never would have even known that that store existed. And people all around the country bought anti-racist books from these Black-owned bookstores. Altogether, that experience of supporting Black-owned bookstores and anti-racist reading lists raised over $2 million for Black-owned bookstores on our platform. That's something we could have only done with the internet and online. So while I love physical spaces, and I would much rather actually enter one of those stores and browse and talk to the owners, digital brings a lot of power if it's used in a kind of an innovative and creative way. Well, when I was an undergraduate, I was a philosophy major, and I thought I was going to be a novelist. I still think I'm going to be a novelist. And I think that everything I've built is a procrastination because I actually think I should be writing my novel. And so I started building companies instead of writing. Sometimes when you enter like business environments, people kind of laugh at philosophy majors. But philosophy majors actually it teaches you how to think critically. I learned how to think critically and question things, and I think it was tremendously beneficial to me. I think that in general, if you focus narrowly on business, you miss the big picture, and you need the big picture to really be innovators. And if you look at the most successful entrepreneurs, they often are readers. They often are people with wide range of cultural interests. Somebody asked me once, like, why most of the things I've started have been successful. I've only had one thing that didn't quite work. And I said, I think it's because my mental model of the world is fairly accurate. By that, I mean, like, I can kind of see if something is going to succeed or not. I have a sense of what people will respond to and what they won't, or where an opportunity, like how big an opportunity really is. That kind of mental model of the world, it develops through experience with people, and experience can be gained by reading. You can certainly learn a lot about different points of views and perspectives through reading, and you can also learn all about quantum mechanics and quantum physics, and you can also learn a lot about history and revolution and civil rights, and you can learn what it feels like to be a person in a completely different part of the world in a completely different time. All of that background helps create a mental model of the world, and also helps create empathy and understanding. And that kind of intangible knowledge can inform how successful a business is. It can keep you from going down the wrong path. It can make sure that when you do craft a message and a story, you know how to tell people about it in a way that's going to excite them. And you know how to reach different communities and all of that. So while my undergrad wasn't in business, everything has been born out of the same curiosity for the world that caused me to be a philosophy major who was also like really interested in literature and reading. The barriers to entry you can't really respect them. You can be intimidated by them. And I think I wasted about 10 years by feeling like New York City and halls of power and stuff like that were like something that I wasn't qualified to engage in. I was always kind of doing stuff on the side, or like the reason I probably worked at Disney and worked in information technology is because I really wanted to be an editor and writer, but I didn't feel qualified. So that kind of sense of like what's possible is really important, not to respect any doubts that you have and understand that it's really pretty porous. You can break into anything if you try hard enough and if you really care about it. When I look at the people in my MFA program, the people who have been successful are the ones who never stopped writing. When I started Electric Literature, I started it with very little resources and very few contacts, but the idea was good and it opened up possibilities. During that time period, I wasn't afraid to take risks, embarrass myself by taking a risk and failing. One of the things Electric Literature did in the beginning was a big Twitter story that was 3 days long, and we got all of these different accounts to tweet it at the same time and kind of drowned out Twitter. So everywhere you went on Twitter, if you were interested in books, you would see this story being published. It freaked everybody out, and some people were super annoyed by it. They're like, like, why is this story always in my feed? And for 3 days, it kept going. And at the end of that experiment, we had 120,000 Twitter followers, and we started it with like 6,000. Now, if we had been too embarrassed by the people who got mad and we had shut it down, if we had been too afraid to expose ourselves by doing this huge Twitter experiment, then we never would have gotten 120,000 Twitter followers. There were people who called it a disaster and got mad. But meanwhile, it actually resonated with a lot more people than the critics. With Bookshop, I made the decision to put the money that we've made right on the top of the website on every single page. And people, when I was starting it, including investors, were like, are you crazy? Like, it's going to say $10 and everyone's going to laugh. But I knew that GoFundMes and that kind of thing are really successful because people like to see that they're making a difference. And I knew that if people could buy $50 worth of books and see that number go up by $15, it would make them feel good about themselves. And I also felt like if we're totally transparent, that shows the kind of company we are. We're not trying to trick anybody. So we risked the embarrassment of putting that number up there. And then sure enough, when we started to take off, everybody on Twitter was like, I can't believe they went from raising $10,000 to $50,000. And oh my God, I just checked 3 days later, it's at $150,000. And it became like this exciting story that everybody was invested in. And when we broke $1 million, everybody was like, they broke $1 million. So we risked embarrassment and didn't really listen to the people also that said, quote, consumers in the US only care about price. And I was told all these things when I was pitching the idea, just not listening to them and going forward and finding the people that understood that people do care about some things more than price, or enough people do that you can succeed. So I would say just a stomach for risk and a stomach for criticism and rejection, because you're going to get tons of rejection. So the way I broke into everything is by not being afraid of failing, and taking risks and starting my own things and not waiting for somebody to give me an opportunity. And that's the advice I would give.